What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another look at CGC-graded comic books. We're going to take a look at some of the recent auctions that ended over at ComicLink. And as you can tell by this thumbnail, we've got big boy books. We've got some other ones too, but this auction in particular, it's their kind of winter featured auction, had some absolutely incredible books, and I completely struck out on all of the big books that I've been hunting. I think I bid on like 4 or 5 different books, and I lost on every one of them. So I'll go through the details on those auctions as well as a bunch more. But as you can see by this thumbnail, I mean, we've got an ASM 300 in a 9.8. We've got a Hulk 180 in a 9.8. A ASM 129, the first appearance of Punisher. I mean, just incredible books all throughout this auction, and the prices seem to have bounced just a little bit. It just seems like, in general, not all the time, but in general, demand is up. And usually the winter months are the good months to buy comic books, apparently, just based on what I hear from the guys that know what they're doing. I don't. But it just seems like people have some money to burn, at least at the very upper end of the market. So let's dig in. We're going to start off with some Wolverine key books. The first one is Incredible Hulk number 180, the first cameo appearance of Wolverine. This one was a 9.8. I was curious to see where this one would sell because it's an older style case and it's also off-white to white pages versus white pages. So when you start getting into these really massive books that are very expensive, you're going to be paying a lot more for white pages in a new case versus off-white to white. This one did sell for $15,750. Now, the last data point I found on Go Collect was back in April of this year, and it was white pages, and it was a new case style, and it sold for about $20,000. So $15,750 is a pretty big haircut, but you know, usually there is about a 20% discount on these massive books when you start going from white pages to off-white to white pages, especially in a 9.8 for something like this. So very, very pricey book still. And I think that was a really good deal, honestly. If you could live with the off-white to white pages, it's the first cameo appearance of Wolverine. Some would argue it's the first full appearance of Wolverine, but pretty big book. Here we've got a direct edition as well as a newsstand edition of Hulk 340. This is their second fight between Hulk and Wolverine. I've got this one in a direct edition. I was curious to see where this one would end up. I almost bid on it, even though I've already got one. I just thought it was a pretty good buy. This one sold at $1,005. The colors on it were a little bit more muted than I'm looking for. There's some that really pop with the blue. This one, it looks like it's a little faded. So that probably kept the price down just a little bit. But you can see some of these in a 9.8 where just like the whole blue background is bright, crispy blue. And this one was not that, but it was freshly graded. It was pretty nice. It wasn't super freshly graded, but very nice copy. Don't get me wrong. And I would have paid $1,000 all day for it. I mean, I've seen them sell recently as high as $1,200. So $1,000 was a good deal there. Now here was the newsstand. I talked about this one recently and how this one was for sale. This exact book, exact same certification number was for sale on eBay. And it sold, yet it was already listed in a preview auction on ComicLink. So I don't know what's going on there, but it could have been a fake listing on eBay. Who knows? But this one did sell. And the big issue was in the lower right-hand corner, it had kind of a weird curl to the card or to the front of the book. And then on the back of the book, which you can't really see in those photos, it was just a very questionable kind of fraying to the book. So this one, you know, it was nice, don't get me wrong, but I've seen better copies, and I think if I'm going to get a newsstand for this book, I'm going to pay up for it. And it was also mislabeled because this certification number is fairly recent, yet they forgot to put newsstand edition on there. And I've seen a lot of books like that because there's some idiot at CGC that's forgetting to put newsstand edition, even though we all know it's the newsstand because of the barcode. So anyway, there was enough going on around this book between the condition issues that I saw and the fact that it was on eBay previously, even though it was in the preview auction for a preview kind of coming soon for ComicLink, that I stayed away from it. It sold for $3,500, which is a big discount too. I mean, lately they've been going on Instagram for $3,800 to $4,000. So, you know, I think that the market was not dumb, and they looked it up on the CGC website. They saw the close-ups of the back of the book, and it had bad fraying. It had this weird issue in the lower right-hand corner, and you know, for me, it was on eBay as well. So anyway, it did sell for $3,500. I'm not accusing ComicLink of any hijinks. I'm accusing somebody on eBay of hijinks for listing this exact same book. And my guess is that the eBay listing was fraudulent. Next up was Wolverine Limited Series #1 in a newsstand. Again, this one was missing the newsstand edition on the label. So it was just a bad batch for a while there, where any newsstand that you sent into CGC, they forgot to add the label. And because you can tell by the certification number that it's a fairly recent grade, but it's a bad issue. And it was also miscut. You can kind of see how the Marvel Comics Limited Series is kind of off kilter, and it was also miswrapped. You can see the white gets wider as it goes down. So I stayed away from this one, and again, all of those issues factored into the final sales price of $950. Usually you've been seeing $1,100 to $1,200 for this in a newsstand edition. So I think because it was miswrapped, because it was kind of off kilter in terms of how it was printed, and because it was kind of not appropriately labeled newsstand, it was enough to keep people away, and it sold for cheap. Next up, I've got a couple of different giant size X-Men #1. This is the second appearance of Wolverine, as well as the first appearance and origin of the new X-Men, Storm, Nightcrawler. Big book. We all know it's a big book. This one was an 8.0 with white pages. I was actually the winning bidder on this one until right at the very end, and somebody outbid me, and I was okay with it. I didn't particularly want it. I kind of bid on it just to track it, and lo and behold, it stayed. Like my high bid held until with 3 seconds left, somebody won it. So I was the high bid at $2,800. It sold for $2,900, which was the next bid up. But it had some kind of weird eraser marks on the back, so I didn't want to bid too much. But most 8.0s with white pages are selling $3,700 based on Go Collect data. And this one sold for $2,900, so a big discount. But it's because, I think, of the eraser marks on the back, at the bottom of the back of the book. If you looked it up on the CGC website, it definitely had some issues. So, but I think even with those issues, to get it for, let's call it $800 less than the last sale of an 8.0 with white pages, I thought that was a pretty good buy. The 9.2 with white pages also sold. I was tempted on this one, but it was just too expensive. I didn't want to go that high. It was also kind of miswrapped. Like you can see here, the binder was kind of overlaid onto the front of the book. So I think if I'm going to spend this kind of money on a giant size X-Men #1, this is about the grade I'd go, which is a 9.2 with white pages, but I'm going to get it better centered, I think. So I stayed away from it. It sold for $6,800, which was way more than I would have paid anyway. I was thinking kind of $5,500-ish based on Go Collect data, but it went a lot higher than I expected. So once you start getting into these upper grades for these really, really massive books, it seems like the price doesn't matter as much because people have money. If you're dropping $6,800 on colored paper wrapped inside acrylic, you're not really worried about the economy. This is a big book, and it's the kind of money that people who do not have recession issues are going to be spending. So, but it went a lot higher than I expected. I was thinking $5,500 max. It sold for $6,800. Let's get into Amazing Spider-Man keys. This was another tempting one. This was an ASM 14, which is the first appearance of Green Goblin. I was thinking about this one pretty hard. It did have a scuff right there on Spider-Man's legs, and I was, it's kind of an older grade based on the certification number. It was off white to white pages, which I was okay with, and it was nicely centered. Just a little bit of an underwrap on the top versus the bottom, but I just think if I'm going to spend that kind of money, I want to make it like perfect, right? And it's not like it's hard to find a 7.0 for this book. There's a couple of hundred of them at least on the census. So it ended up selling for $4,300, and my number in the back of my mind was $3,800, so I was way low. Nice book, don't get me wrong. I think it's a beautiful book, but it's not a number that I was willing to pay, just given the condition issues of the slab. Next up was, I was curious about this one because it was an ASM number 50 in a 7.5. And I just bought this book on Instagram in an 8.0. Same page quality, off-white to white, but I got an 8.0. This one was a 7.5 of ASM number 50, and this is the first appearance of Kingpin. Really happy with my copy. And quite honestly, for some of these really big books, Instagram is a great way to go. There are some good deals. You avoid a lot of fees and taxes and shipping costs. It's just like a flat number, take it or leave it. And I took it. I got mine. And this one ended up selling for $20.44. And that's almost exactly what I paid for mine, except mine's an 8.0 versus a 7.5. So I think that, all in, given the comic book market and where it is, I feel like I got a really good deal because I paid the exact same price as what this one sold for, and it's a slightly lower grade in a 7.5. Both of ours have Both this one and the one I bought have off-white to white pages, but it's a big book, awesome cover, very happy with my copy. I'm sure I'll show it in a video soon, but 2044 took that one home. Next up, we've got ASM number 129, the first appearance of Punisher. I've got a 9.4 as well as a 9.8, and 9.4, 9.6 is probably about the max that I could afford. So I was watching this one closely, freshly graded. I was really tempted on it because I do have the funds for it, but I was juggling 3 or 4 other books, and so this one fell by the wayside. It sold for $40.50, and that's a number I'd pay all day long, $40.50. In my mind, for a 9.4, it's about $4,000. For a 9.6, you got to jump up to about $7,000 or $8,000. And then a 9.8 is out of the stratosphere and beyond anything I can afford. And here is a 9.8. This one sold for $27,751. That's actually down a little bit from the last few sales I've seen. They've been kind of $28,000 to $30,000. This one sold for $27,751, and it was freshly graded, as good as it gets, and I think that was a great deal. If you can afford that kind of book, that's beyond what I can afford, but I think if I do get an ASM 129, it's probably going to be a 9.4, maybe a 9.6, maybe, but I would have to save up quite a bit of money for it. But 9.4 it's doable. It's doable with some financial discipline and kind of not spending any of the money from some of the sales I've had recently. I could do it. I could do it right now. But a 9.6 is, it's going to take a couple of months of savings. A 9.8, that's a different story. That's beyond what I can afford. Here's another one I did bid on. This is ASM number 300, the first appearance of Venom, freshly graded, really nice copy. And I actually bid more than this bid. So what happened on this one was this one sold for $3,200. It was at $3,100 as time was expiring. I bid $3,275. But the problem is with ComicLink, once you start getting up into these big boy numbers, they go in increments of $100. And so my $3,275 bid came in after, like milliseconds after somebody bid $3,200. So unfortunately, my bid was an error, and it wouldn't register because the next possible bid had to be $3,300. So it was bad luck. It was just bad timing. If I had put my bid in maybe a half a second earlier, then I would have won at $3,200. But somebody bid 32. I bid $3,275. It's increments of $100, so I lost it. And it's okay. I'm okay with that because this is not a hard book to find, even in a 9.8 grade. There are hundreds, if not thousands of them on the census, so I will get one day. But it just was not meant to be this time, and somebody got a fair deal. It's not a great deal. Last month, one sold at $31.50. Another one sold at $30.50. What I liked about this one is that it was freshly graded, and everything was perfectly aligned with the 300s on the edges here. It just looked really, really clean, and the colors were really nice on it. So I did bid on it, but I lost. But that's the way it goes. Likewise, I bid on this one, Detective Comics number 400 in a CGC 9.2 with white pages. This is the origin and first appearance of Man-Bat, a pretty big villain, a secondary villain from the Batman universe. It's a favorite villain of mine. Great Neil Adams cover. And there's not many of these in the census once you start getting into these upper grades. I think for a 9.2, there was like 70 or 80 of them, if not less. And then for higher grades, it's even less. There's like maybe a total of 100 that are graded higher than this, if not less than that. So it was a very desirable book. Now, based on Go Collect data, there was one that sold recently at $1,100 this year, and it sold for $2,100. So I was nowhere close. I bid $1,100. I was the winning bidder until the very end, and it jumped to $2,100, which is a massive overpay. Massive. There was a 9.4 that sold for about this price earlier this year. So this one was a lower grade, and someone paid that much for a lower grade. But in all fairness, it was white pages. It was a tough book to find in a very high grade. And to me, this is a massive overpay. No offense if you happen to be the one that bought it, but I was thinking $1,100 all day long max, and it sold nowhere close to that price. So it is what it is. Another book I bid on was Batman 423 in a 9.8. I bid, I think, $20.80, and it sold for $21.85. I think I bid $20.85. Someone else bid $21.85. So I did end up losing this one. It's not a first appearance or anything, but it's a fairly iconic cover from Todd McFarlane. So it's one I'd like to add to the collection. There's only maybe 220 or so in a 9.8. So it's for the first print. It's not an easy book to find, but it was not meant to be again. So I lost that one. Here's another one that did sell at $24.51. And I actually looked at both of these books on the CGC website, this one actually was not as nice as the one that sold for cheaper. So this one did sell for $24.51, but the back of it had some fraying on the bottom of the book. So I thought this one was actually the better deal at $21.85. Next up, we've got a Detective Comics 359 in a 9.6 grade. This is one of, if not the highest grade that's out there. There might be one 9.8 at all on the census, but this was a 9.6. Origin and first appearance of Batgirl, pretty iconic cover, Barbara Gordon, and it was off-white to white pages. It sold for $31,000, so big money on that one. I had a buddy who was looking at this one closely. I think his max bid was like $28,000. It blew past that number and sold for $31,000. Another book that's very difficult to find in a high grade is Detective Comics 457. This is the first appearance of Leslie Tompkins. It's who I have no idea who that is, but it's the origin of Batman retold. There's only 4 of these on the census, I believe. I think it says right here, 1 of 5. So this is 1 of 5 on the census in a 9.8 grade. And I was thinking if it stayed around $1,200, $1,300 maybe. It sold for $2,100, so I was nowhere close again. But again, when you start talking about books where there's 1 of 5 in total on the census, it's from 1976. It's a pretty awesome cover because it reminds me of Batman 404, which is also kind of the year 1 storyline and depicts the same crime alley scene where Bruce Wayne's parents die. And so I thought it'd be awesome to pair with 404 because that's a book I do have. But I'm not paying $2,100 for it, so that's what it sold for, though. I've had some requests for G.I. Joe books. G.I. Joe Special #1 with white pages also sold. This is a Todd McFarlane interior art, but they basically did an homage or an homage of ASM #1 from 1990-ish, somewhere in that ballpark, where Snake Eyes is in the same pose as Spider-Man. And it retells G.I. Joe #61, The Death of Cobra Commander. And I do have this book in my collection. This one sold in an auction for $750. $750. I think that's a pretty good deal. I think I paid $850 for mine about 6 months ago when the market was maybe a little bit stronger. So $750, I feel like that's pretty good in the current market environment. There's only about 80 or 90 of these on the census in a 9.8 grade. Also, G.I. Joe #21. This is the first appearance of Storm Shadow. This is the first print. It was off-white to white pages, so that kept the price down a little bit. It sold at $1,500. I've seen as high as about $1,800 for white pages. So another book that is pretty desirable from the G.I. Joe universe is the first print of 21, which is the first appearance of Storm Shadow. It's the silent issue, pretty famous issue for those of you that like G.I. Joe comics. What else do we got here? I've got some Star Wars books. Star Wars #1. This one had the CVA exceptional label, meaning that it's a particularly good 9.8. Older label, though, older case style. That one sold for $33.33, which is down a little bit. Again, it's an older case style. It does have some bleed through on the Star Wars logo, but it was a CVA exceptional, so that's something to keep in mind. So I think that's a pretty good deal, though, if you can live with the older style label. Pretty nice looking example, though, for $3,300. This was an interesting one. This was Star Wars #68, but this is the Canadian price variant. So not many of these on the census. And also CGC updated the label for Star Wars #68. It now says the first appearance of the planet Mandalore. So it's the first appearance of the Mandalorians. It used to say the origin of Boba Fett, which was incorrect. It was not the origin of Boba Fett. It's actually Finn Shiza on the cover, and it's basically a throwback story, a flashback story that includes the first appearance of Mandalorians in Star Wars comic books. But this was the very desirable Canadian price variant, and it sold for big money, $3,101, which was a shocker to me. I did not expect it to go that high. The regular newsstand for this book, you're probably looking at $1,800, somewhere in that ballpark, maybe $2,000 at the upper end. But wow, $3,101 was the final sales price on that one. We had the Clone Wars #1, the standard cover A, but it was the CVA exceptional again, which they add that sticker for books that are particularly clean, particularly good. I would call, the way I look at that CVA label is it's almost a 9.9. That's how I consider that label. So it sold for a lot of money as a result. This book has been going for around $1,100 lately. This one sold for $1,788. So big premium associated with that CVA label. Next up, we had Ultimate Fallout 4, the variant edition. This one was a CGC 9.8. This is the 1 in 25 ratio variant and the first appearance of Miles Morales. This one sold for $16,950. There was one on eBay that sold recently for $12,000 to $13,000. So this book is continuing to come down in price. And, you know, even on Instagram, you might see in that 13,000, 14,000 ballpark. So, 16,950 is actually a little bit higher than where this book has been selling on Instagram, believe it or not. So it's really come down. Ultimate Fallout 4 in the standard cover A. This one sold for $12.57. So it continues to drop as well. A lot of people think it might hit sub $1,000 next year. And if it does, I'm going to be very tempted. I was tempted at $1,400, but it keeps dropping. So I keep waiting. At some point I'll pull the trigger on it, but $12.57 is where the kind of the latest data point is for this book. And even on Instagram, I see even lower than that, like $11.99, $12.50. You know, I haven't seen below $1,100 for this book, but I think we're getting that way. I think it might hit underneath $1,000 in the next few months, just given that there's like what 2,000 or 3,000, 4,000 copies of this in a 9.8 grade. So it's a modern key, but there are a lot of them on the census, and people are starting to, you know, realize that, hey, this is not a $5,000 book. I don't remember what the peak was for this book, but it was really, really crazy. It got up to like $4,600, $4,700, something stupid. So once you start seeing those big prices where you have a lot of them on the census, it's just a no-brainer that they're going to come down to earth again. So anyway, that's kind of my look at recent sales over at ComicLink. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll be back soon.